Infinity Train's fourth book was released this week, and while it wasn't intended to be the final season, it was an interesting one to end on from a thematic angle. Book 4 of Infinity Train, titled Duet, focus on Min-gi and Ryan, two boys of Asian descent whose fates seem to be tied together. As children, they had dreams of starting a band, but it fell apart when Min-gi became nervous about his future and left Ryan on stage alone for their first performance. Min-gi goes on to work a bad job and study for a degree that he doesn't enjoy, living the safe life. Ryan goes around the country trying to play his music, but finds virtually no success and returns with fewer fans than he left with. Ryan gets it in his head that he could find success with the help of Min-gi, so decides to steal his keys after not seeing him for a year, a symbol of Min-gi's responsible lifestyle. With the keys, Ryan tries to lure his old friend to a music performance. When they get on the train, they of course end up on the Infinity Train, where they have to work through their personal issues in order to get sent back home. These boys begin to rekindle their friendship, but along the way they have to address a lot of their issues. Interestingly, each boy's arc is an inversion of the others. Min-gi chooses a safe life for easy success, but he is not happy. Ryan chose the rock star lifestyle and had lots of fun, but had no stability with which to cultivate success. Each boy learns to not just be a bit more like each other, but that they need each other in their lives in order to balance themselves out. Ryan begins to understand why Min-gi abandoned him on stage when he almost abandons Min-gi on the train, and in the end they learn that neither were truly a villain in either scenario, that they are both good people, but they are both capable of mistakes, and as such they are able to forgive each other for those mistakes. With this realization, they are both able to get their numbers down to 0, their two doors merge together, and they are able to return to Earth, where they go on to put their band together. It was a great story, but what was it trying to say? Storytelling as a whole has a very basic format. A character has a flaw, a character gets exposed to a conflict, the character learns to fix that flaw by resolving the conflict, and returns to their normal life having been made a better person. Infinity Train makes this a very literal part of its story, as the train only takes passengers who have personal issues and then doesn't let them leave until they learn the lessons necessary to resolve those personal issues, with most of these personal issues being the character learning to be a better person. Since the train decides when and why a passenger can leave, it acts as an in-world moral authority, and while it may be considered flaws in some ways within the world of the show, it gives us a strong idea of what the creator of the show is trying to say, not just from the rules of how things work in the world, but which rules they allow themselves to break and why. For the most part, Infinity Train's philosophy seems to be built around the concept of trying to be a better person, not necessarily a good one. This is measured not by the numbers on their hands, but almost entirely by how their actions affect other people. They show a diverse series of relationships across the entire show, with the people in those relationships each having their own unique reason for their moral obligations to one another. That being said, the primary relationships explored in the first 3 seasons are the 3 key relationships in the human reproductive cycle, as those tend to be the 3 most important relationships in a typical person's life, with typical being a word of extreme importance here because of how that focus shifts in Book 4. Season 1 focused on what is usually the first important relationship of a human's life, their relationship with their parents. Tulip is self-centered in the beginning. She wants her parents to bend to her will, but learns through the help of the Infinity Train that even children have moral obligations to try and be a part of their parents' lives. Season 2 shifted focus to the next stage in the human reproduction cycle, which would be finding a mate. Infinity Train gave us this in the form of MT and Jessie. MT's journey is learning what it takes to be seen as human by the Infinity Train, and that is driven largely by her feelings for Jessie. Both of them learn the moral obligation they have to sacrifice their own opportunities to be a part of each other's lives, or to sacrifice that in order to better the other person's life. Season 3 naturally focuses on the next step, which is becoming the parent in the same relationship explored in Season 1. This time we see Grace learn the responsibility she has over children whose lives she's affected. Although she has no blood relation to them, this is a clear parallel for the same responsibilities that come with being a parent. With the typical human reproduction cycle now being fully explored within the show, seasons 4 and beyond would have to go beyond that, and yet they would still need to keep the focus on relationships that feel just as important and intense as in earlier seasons to match the tone. With that in mind, season 4 focuses on the relationship of two very close boys, ones who seem to be the most important relationship in each other's lives, but are not connected by blood or romance. What makes these boys important to each other's lives, and what, from a moral standpoint, do they owe each other, and why? In episode 7 of this season, Ryan's number reaches 0 when he makes the promise not to leave Mingi behind. Ironically, using the door would have meant breaking that promise, so his door back to reality disappears as soon as he seriously considers it. The train has decided that morally, Ryan needs to stand by Mingi to be a good person. We don't know if Mingi needs to do the same for Ryan, as when his door is presented, he does not try to leave, so we don't see if it will disappear, so we cannot say whether or not this is about two equals who should be standing by each other no matter what, or simply Ryan needing to atone for the fact that he accidentally lured Mingi onto the train to begin with. And ultimately, we cannot answer that, and that, in the end, is kind of the point. When the boys end up on the Infinity Train together, Amelia scoffs at the idea of it being destiny. One explains that it is essentially a statistical eventual outcome, similar to the concept of twins. Twins typically have a spiritual significance assigned to them in storytelling. With how common it is to give birth to a single child and how rare it is to give birth to twins, there is this sense of destiny that these two people were meant to be together, otherwise they wouldn't be born together. Interestingly enough, the first episode is actually called The Twin Tapes, but features only a single tape that shows the life of both of the boys simultaneously, working as a single shot when they are together and a split shot when they are apart. The twin parallel becomes even more apparent when you take into account that the boys were born at the same time on the same day in the same hospital, immediately forming a connection and becoming lifelong friends through their parents. From the spiritual angle, this would be called destiny, something akin to them sharing a soul, or perhaps their souls themselves being twins. But on the scientific side, they are essentially just statistical twins, two people who just so happen to have a lot of coincidences line up for them to spend their lives together, and just one of the many random eventual outcomes that would happen throughout human history. Because of their unique circumstances that made up their lives, they do not have the same moral obligations to family or a romantic partner that most people do. Earlier, I mentioned that the reproductive cycle's relationships are the three most important relationships in a complete human life, but emphasized that this was just the typical outcome. And sometimes, the less typical outcome is just two people who have no blood or romance between them, and yet, through sheer coincidence, end up being the most important relationship in each other's lives. A statistical, eventual probability.